The Rolls-Royce's leather seat was cold against Elle's cheek, but it was softer than any surface she'd touched in months. She pressed herself smaller, knees to chest, blood from her split lip staining the expensive upholstery. Outside, November wind screamed through Manhattan's alleys, carrying the distant wail of sirens and the closer sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, searching. "Elle, you think you can run from me?" Antonio's voice echoed off brick walls, slurred with bourbon and rage. "I own this neighborhood. Every cop, every corner. You're mine." She bit down on her sleeve to muffle the sob. Stupid. So stupid to think she could hide in a car. But the door had been unlocked, and her vision had been blurring, and the cold was eating through her thin sweater, and she just needed anywhere. Just anywhere that isn't there. The car door opened. Ella's heart stopped. She hadn't heard anyone approach. Hadn't heard the electronic beep of a key fob. 1 second she was alone in expensive darkness. The next a man was standing there backlit by streetlight, and she was going to die. "Please." The word came out broken. "Please, I'll get out. I'll go. Just don't tell him I was here." The man didn't move. He was tall. She could tell even through her swollen eye, wearing a black coat that probably cost more than her entire year's rent. His face was shadowed, but she felt his gaze like a physical weight, scanning her trembling form, the blood on her face, the way she'd curled into the corner like a wounded animal. "Who?" His voice was low, accented, Russian, maybe, and completely devoid of emotion. Not angry, not surprised, just assessing. "Who is looking for you?" "It doesn't matter." Ella tried to sit up, but her ribs screamed protest. She'd felt something crack when Antonio had thrown her against the kitchen counter. "I'm sorry. I'll leave. I just needed—" Her voice fractured. "Just until morning. I just needed until morning." Silence. The kind that pressed against eardrums. Then the man moved. Not toward her. Sideways, blocking the alley entrance with his body. When he spoke again, his tone hadn't warmed, but something in it had shifted. "Stay there." Ella blinked. "What?" "Stay in the car. Do not move." Before she could process, he was gone, door closed, and she was alone again in the dark. Her mind spun. Was he calling the police? Antonio had friends in the NYPD. Was he calling Antonio directly? Oh God, what if he knew Antonio? Her stepfather had business associates she'd never met, men who came to the apartment at odd hours, men whose names she wasn't supposed to hear. She should run, now, while she had the chance. But her body wouldn't cooperate. Adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and pain that made every breath feel like drowning. She slumped against the leather, watching her reflection in the tinted window. A ghost with matted hair and hollow eyes, who looked nothing like the girl who'd once believed in things like safety. 3 minutes passed. 5. 10. Then, voices muffled through the car's insulation. Antonio's, loud and confident. Saw her run this way, probably hiding behind some dumpster like the rat she is. Another voice, the one from the car, quieter but carrying an authority that made Elle's skin prickle. "This is private property. Leave." "Private property?" Antonio laughed. "You know who I am? I'm NYPD, 15 years. I'm looking for my daughter. She's sick, needs medication. You seen a girl, mid-20s, brunette?" "No." "Mind if I look around? Just to be safe." "Yes." A pause. Ella pressed her ear to the window. She couldn't see them. The angle was wrong. But she heard the shift in Antonio's tone, the false friendliness curdling into something uglier. "Look, friend, I don't think you understand. I understand perfectly." The Russian accent sharpened each word into a blade. You are standing in my alley, at my car, demanding I help you find someone. I have said no. If you take one more step, my associates will ensure you understand the meaning of that word. Associates. Elle's gaze darted to the alley entrance. 2 more shapes had materialized, broad-shouldered, faces hidden, but their stance spoke of violence held on a leash. Antonio must have seen them too, because his bluster deflated. This isn't over. She's my responsibility. When I find her... If she does not wish to be found, the man interrupted, voice dropping to something that made Ella's breath catch. Then she will not be found. Leave. Now. Footsteps. Retreated. Fading into the city's constant hum. Ella waited, counting heartbeats, until the car door opened again. The man slid into the driver's seat, movements economical, controlled. Up close, with the interior light on, she could finally see him clearly. Late 30s, dark hair cut short, jaw sharp enough to cut glass, eyes the color of frozen Baltic Sea, a face built for intimidation, except for the faint scar bisecting his left eyebrow, a crack in the marble. He adjusted the rear view, mirror, meeting her gaze in the reflection. He is gone, he said. He will not return tonight. Ella tried to speak, failed, tried again. Why did you are bleeding on my upholstery. Matter of fact. And you asked for morning. It is currently... He glanced at the dashboard. 11:47 p.m. Morning is 7 hours away. I do not leave debts unpaid. I didn't mean, I can clean it, Where do you live? The question landed like a trap. Elle's throat closed. I can't. He knows. Where? He has keys, The wall she'd built to hold herself together began to crack. I don't have anywhere. I don't have anyone. My mom died last year, and I thought if I just stayed, if I just made it through, he'd eventually... But he won't. He won't stop. And I'm so tired. She hadn't meant to say any of that. Hadn't meant to let the truth bleed out in front of a stranger in an expensive car who'd probably just dump her at a shelter and forget she existed by dawn. But the man in the front seat didn't look away from the mirror, didn't flinch. What is your name? He asked. Elle. Elle Adams. Elle. He tested it, the syllable foreign in his mouth. Then he started the engine, the rolls purring to life like a satisfied cat. I am Nicola, and you are correct. You cannot return there. Not tonight. Not while you look like this. The car pulled smoothly into traffic, heading uptown, away from her neighborhood, away from everything she knew. Ella should have been terrified. Should have demanded he let her out. Instead, she closed her eyes and let the warmth from the heating vents wash over her frozen skin, and for the first time in a year, she let herself hope that morning might actually come. The penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a building Elle had only ever seen from subway windows, one of those glass and steel monoliths overlooking Central Park where light itself seemed cleaner, sharper. The elevator ride was silent except for the whisper of machinery and her own ragged breathing. Nicola stood with his back to her, hands clasped behind him. Posture so rigidly straight it looked painful. When the doors opened directly into his apartment, Ella forgot how to breathe. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Manhattan like a painting, the city's lights competing with the stars they'd long since drowned out. Marble floors caught and multiplied the glow from recessed lighting, furniture that belonged in museums, not homes. Everything cold and beautiful and utterly untouchable. This way. Nicola led her through the main room, past a fireplace tall enough to stand in, past bookshelves in languages she couldn't read, to a bedroom that was larger than her entire apartment had been. Cream-colored walls, a bed that could sleep 4, an attached bathroom she could see through the half-open door. You will stay here tonight, he said. Shower. There are clothes in the closet from... He paused, something flickering across his face too quick to name. From before. They should fit. Ella hovered in the doorway, arms wrapped around her ribs. I don't understand. You don't know me. Why are you... Because I asked for mourning once. The words came out flat, factual. And no one gave it to me. Consider this a correction of cosmic imbalance. He moved to leave, then stopped, half-turned. The bathroom cabinet has first aid supplies. For your face. Do not... His jaw tightened. Do not look in the mirror if you wish to sleep tonight. It will still be there in the morning. Then he was gone, door clicking shut, with a finality that felt like safety. Ella stood frozen for a long moment before her knees gave out. She sank onto the carpet, plush, cream, probably worth more than she'd earn in a month, and pressed her palms to her eyes. But the tears came anyway. Great shuddering sobs that tore through her chest and left her gasping. She cried for her mother, who died believing Elle would be okay. Cried for the girl she'd been at 24, fresh out of design school, full of plans. Cried for 3 years of her life evaporated into survival mode, of making herself smaller and quieter, and less, hoping that would finally be enough. When the storm passed, Elle dragged herself upright and stumbled to the bathroom. The shower was rainfall style, temperature controlled by a panel that looked like it belonged on a spaceship. She stood underwater hot enough to hurt, watching pink swirl down the drain, scrubbing its skin until it felt raw and new. The shampoo smelled like cedar and something else. Expensive, unfamiliar. Nothing like the generic brand she'd been stretching for weeks. She did look in the mirror. Couldn't help it. The damage was worse than she'd thought. Her left eye swollen nearly shut, purpling at the edges. Split lip, crusty with dried blood. Bruises blooming along her jaw in the perfect shape of knuckles. And lower, hidden beneath the towel, the mottled greens and yellows of older injuries layered like sediment. This is what I let myself become, she thought. This is what keeping the peace costs. The closet yielded soft cotton pants and a cashmere sweater, tags still attached, sized for someone close to her frame. Ella tried not to wonder about the before Nicola had mentioned, tried not to imagine whose clothes these were meant to be. When she emerged, she found a tray on the bedside table, tea, still steaming, and 2 slices of toast with butter and jam. A note in angular handwriting, eat, sleep. We will talk. In the morning. Elle obeyed, suddenly ravenous. The tea was black, unsweetened, strong enough to strip paint, and exactly what she needed. She ate both slices of toast, then climbed into bed, sinking into sheets with a thread count she couldn't begin to guess. She'd thought sleep would be impossible, thought her mind would race, cataloging every bad decision that led here, every reason this was temporary and fragile. Instead, she dropped into darkness so complete it felt like mercy. Morning came, with pale winter light filtering through sheer curtains and the smell of coffee. Elle sat up slowly, inventory of pain. Ribs still ached, face throbbed, but the bone-deep exhaustion had receded slightly. The clock read 9:17 a.m. She'd slept for nearly 10 hours. Voices drifted from somewhere in the penthouse. Low, rapid Russian. Nicola's baritone and another man's rougher tenor, words sharp with disagreement. Ella crept to the door, pressed her ear to the wood. Cannot keep her here, Nicola. You know the rules. I know many rules. I also know which ones I wrote. This is different. She is not a business asset, not family, just some girl. Do not. The temperature in Nicola's voice dropped to sub-zero. Do not reduce her to some girl. You did not see her face. You did not hear her voice when she asked for mourning. A long pause. Then quieter. Your mother? My mother, my sister. Every woman who ever needed help and received none because the men with power decided she did not matter enough. Sounds of movement. Footsteps. Liquid pouring. She stays until she is ready to leave. That is final. And when Antonio Calderano comes looking, when he brings his NYPD connections, then we will have a conversation about what happens to men who put hands on women in my city. Ella pulled back from the door, heart hammering. She shouldn't be here. This wasn't her world. Men like Nicola didn't help people like her without expecting something in return, and whatever currency he dealt in. She couldn't afford the price. She was pulling on her shoes, blood-stained, pathetic, when the bedroom door opened. Nicola stood in the doorway with 2 mugs of coffee. In daylight, he looked somehow more and less intimidating. Dark circles under those ice-chip eyes, stubble shadowing his jaw, wearing black slacks and a white button-down with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. Human. Tired. "You are leaving," he observed. Not a question. Elle set down her shoe. "I heard. Your friend?" "He's right. I shouldn't be here. I'm not your problem." "No," Nicola agreed. "You are not a problem at all. You are a person who needed help. I provided it. These are not the same thing." He crossed to the small sitting area by the windows, set down both mugs, and lowered himself into one of the chairs with the controlled precision of someone whose body had learned violence young. "Sit," he said. "Please." Ella hesitated, then obeyed. The coffee was black, like the tea. She wrapped both hands around the mug, letting the heat seep into her palms. "I am going to ask you questions," Nicola said. "You do not have to answer, but I need to understand what we are working with." "We?" His expression didn't change. "Antonio Calderano, former NYPD, currently working private security for the Lucianos. Known associations with corrupt officers in the 19th precinct. History of violence, 2 complaints dismissed, 1 suspicious suicide of a previous girlfriend 7 years ago that was ruled accidental overdose." Ella's coffee mug slipped. She caught it, but her hands were shaking. "How do you couldn't have found all that since last night." "I made calls." He leaned back, fingers steepled. "I have resources. What I do not have is your story." "Was he always like this?" "No." The word came out bitter. "At first he was charming, helpful. My mom was sick, cancer, and he swept in like some kind of savior. Paid bills, drove her to appointments. I was suspicious, but she was happy, so I stayed quiet. They got married 6 months before she died. And after he didn't need to pretend anymore." Ella stared into her coffee. "The first time he hit me, he apologized, cried, said I reminded him of someone who'd hurt him, that he'd get help. I believed him. The second time he said I'd provoked it. The third time he didn't bother with excuses." Her voice was steady, detached, like she was narrating someone else's life. "I tried to leave, twice. First time, he found me at a friend's place within 6 hours. Told her I was mentally ill, off my meds, dangerous. She believed him. He had the badge, the uniform. Second time, I made it to a shelter. He showed up with 2 officers, said I'd stolen from him, had a warrant. I didn't, but they took his word over mine." Nicola's knuckles had gone white around his own mug. "So I stopped trying," Ella continued. "Figured if I could just survive until, I don't know, until something changed, until he got bored, until I disappeared enough that he forgot I existed." She finally looked up, meeting those frozen eyes. "Last night, he told me he was going to make sure I never embarrassed him again. And I finally knew, that if I stayed, I wouldn't survive until morning. Silence pooled between them, broken only by the distant hum of the city. Then Nicola set down his mug and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Ella Adams," he said quietly, "I am going to make you an offer. You may refuse, but hear me completely before you decide." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "You will stay here, in this apartment, for as long as you need. You will have your own room, privacy, security. In exchange, you will do nothing." Elle blinked. "Nothing?" "Nothing," he confirmed. "No cleaning, no cooking, no—" His mouth tightened. "Repayment of any kind. You will simply exist, safely, while you heal, physically and otherwise. I will provide access to a therapist who specializes in trauma, a lawyer who will help you navigate restraining orders, legal separation from Antonio's influence. When you are ready, if you are ready, I will help you find work, housing, whatever you need to rebuild." It was too much, too generous, too impossible. "Why?" Elle whispered. "What do you get out of this?" Nicola was quiet for a long moment, gaze drifting to the windows, to the city beyond. "When I was 8 years old," he said finally, "I watched my father beat my mother to death in our kitchen in St. Petersburg. I was hiding in the cupboard, too small to help, too afraid to scream. After he set the apartment on fire and left, told the authorities she'd been drinking, knocked over a candle." Elle's chest constricted. "I spent the next 10 years in state orphanages, then streets, then worse places." He looked back at her, and for the first time, she saw past the ice, saw the child who'd never been given mourning. "I built an empire on the principle that power is the only thing that matters, that mercy is weakness, that the strong take and the weak suffer." He stood, walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "And then I heard your voice in my car, asking for the same thing I once begged for, and I realized I have spent 30 years becoming the kind of man who could have saved my mother. It would be a profound waste not to use that power at least once for its intended purpose." Elle couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. "So," Nicola turned, expression carefully neutral, "that is what I get. The knowledge that this time, the child hiding in the metaphorical cupboard does not have to watch someone die. You may accept or refuse. But know this. If you stay, Antonio Calderano will never touch you again. On that, you have my word." And Ellie, who'd learned not to trust words, who'd survived by expecting nothing and being grateful for less, Elle believed him. The first week passed in a strange suspension of time. Elle slept more than she had in years, deep, dreamless stretches that left her disoriented when she woke to the penthouse's perpetual quiet. Nicola was rarely there during daylight hours. She'd hear him leave before dawn, return after dark, always announced by the elevator's pneumatic hiss and the low murmur of Russian as he conferred with whoever accompanied him. She explored the apartment in his absence, mapping its contradictions. The kitchen was professional grade, but looked barely used, all gleaming surfaces and untouched appliances. The library held first, editions in 6 languages, organized with military precision. But tucked in a corner, she found a battered paperback of Russian fairy tales, spine cracked from repeated reading, pages soft as cloth. One room remained locked. Elle had tested the handle on her 3rd day, curious, then jerked back when she'd heard Nicola's voice behind her. "That room is not for guests." She'd spun, heart racing. He'd been standing in the hallway, still wearing his coat, snowflakes melting in his dark hair. "I'm sorry, I wasn't—" "I know." His expression had been unreadable. "But that room stays closed. Please." The please had made it worse somehow. A crack in the armor. Now, 10 days into her stay, Elle sat curled in the window seat overlooking Central Park, sketchpad balanced on her knees. She'd found it in one of the guest rooms, expensive, barely used, and her fingers had itched for the familiar comfort of charcoal on paper. The drawing taking shape was the view: skeletal trees against snow, the lake, frozen solid, joggers reduced to small dark shapes against winter white. She'd forgotten how this felt, creating something just because she could. "You are an artist." Elle jumped, smearing a line. Nicola stood in the archway, jacket draped over one arm, regarding her work with that unsettling intensity. "Was," she corrected, setting down the charcoal. "I studied graphic design, but that was before." He crossed to the window, slow enough that she could have moved if she'd wanted. Up close, she noticed new details: a split knuckle on his right hand, freshly scabbed, a tension in his jaw that spoke of a very long day. "Before is not the same as never again," he said, eyes on her sketch. "This is good. Clean lines. You see the structure beneath surface details." It was the most personal comment he'd made since that first morning. Elle found herself answering honestly. "My professor used to say I was too focused on foundations, that I needed to loosen up, embrace chaos. Chaos is overrated." Nicola's mouth quirked. Not quite a smile, but close. Foundations are what keep buildings standing when storms come. Before Elle could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and whatever warmth had briefly thawed his expression froze solid again. "I have a meeting," he said. "Dinner will be delivered at 7. There is—" He hesitated. "There is someone coming tomorrow. Dr. Volkov. She is the therapist I mentioned. You are not obligated to speak with her, but I think it would be beneficial." Ella's fingers tightened on the sketchpad. "I've tried therapy before. Antonio monitored the sessions, made sure I said the right things. Dr. Volkov reports to no one but you, and her office is here, in the building. You do not have to leave this floor if you do not wish to." The consideration in that detail, the understanding that even the elevator might feel like too much exposure, made Elle's throat tight. "Okay," she managed. "I'll try." Nicola nodded once, then left, and the apartment returned to its cathedral silence. Dr. Volkov arrived at 10 a.m. sharp, a compact woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She settled into the chair across from Ella with the ease of someone accustomed to wounded creatures. "Nicola tells me you have been through something difficult," she began, accent softening the consonants. "I am not here to fix you, only to provide tools if you wish to use them." Ella had expected probing questions, clinical, detachment. Instead, Dr. Volkov spent the first session simply listening as Elle talked. About her mother, about the slow erosion of self under Antonio's control, about the peculiar guilt of surviving when you'd spent so long wishing you wouldn't. "Trauma," Dr. Volkov said near the end, "is not a linear thing. You will have good days and terrible days, days when you believe you are healed, and days when the smallest trigger sends you back to that kitchen, that alley. This is normal. This is your brain trying to protect you the only way it knows how. How do I make it stop? You don't. You learn to coexist with it, to recognize the difference between past danger and present safety." She leaned forward. "Right now, your nervous system is screaming that threat is everywhere. It will take time to teach it otherwise. Be patient with yourself." After she left, Ella felt scraped raw, but also strangely lighter. She was making tea when Nicola returned that evening, earlier than usual. He paused in the kitchen doorway, watching her navigate the space with increasing familiarity. "How was Dr. Volkov?" he asked. "Intense. Good." Ella poured a second cup without asking, slid it across the counter. She She said trauma isn't linear. She would know. Nicola accepted the tea, fingers brushing hers, brief, electric. She worked in Chechnya during the wars, saw things that would break most people, but she believes in the capacity to heal. They drank in comfortable silence, and Ella realized this was the longest conversation they'd had that wasn't about logistics or safety protocols. "Can I ask you something?" she ventured. "You may ask. I may not answer." "Fair." Ella chose her words carefully. "That locked room, does it have something to do with your mother?" Nicola went very still. For a long moment, Ella thought she'd overstepped, that he'd retreat into the cold formality of their first days. Then, "It was my sister's room. Katya. She would have been 32 this year. Would have been. She was taken by the state after our mother died," he continued, voice flat. "Sent to a different facility than mine. I tried to find her when I was old enough, had enough resources. By then, she had been dead for 6 years. Pneumonia, they said. Inadequate medical care." Ella set down her cup before she dropped it. "Nicola, I do not want sympathy." The words were sharp, automatic, then softer. "I want her room to exist as it would have if she had lived. As if she might walk through that door someday and find it waiting." He drained his tea, rinsed the cup with meticulous care, and left the kitchen without looking back. Elle stood alone in the gleaming space, understanding with sudden clarity why mercy felt like weakness to him. Why saving someone must feel like rewriting an ending he'd had no power to change. She thought of the fairy tale book, read until the pages turned soft. Thought of a little boy in a cupboard, learning that the only hands that saved you were your own. And she thought, maybe we're both learning that isn't always true. 3 weeks became a month. Winter deepened, blanketing the city in snow that muffled sound and softened edges. Ella fell into a rhythm. Mornings with Dr. Volkov, afternoons sketching or reading, evenings in Nicola's sporadic company. He began coming home earlier, joining her for dinner more often than not. They ate in the dining room, a space too formal for the quiet conversations that unspooled between them, talking about small things, books, architecture, the particular madness of New York pigeons. Never his work, never the details of what put those fresh bruises on his knuckles, that new hardness in his eyes. But sometimes, late at night when he thought she was asleep, Elle would hear him playing piano in the front room. Chopin, mostly. Nocturnes that sounded like grief given melody. She'd lie in bed listening, and wonder if he knew she could hear. If he played for himself, or for ghosts. One evening in mid-December, Elle emerged from her room to find Nicola standing at the windows, phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Russian. His free hand was clenched so tight the knuckles had gone white. He ended the call, noticed her, and something in his expression made her stomach drop. "What is it?" she asked. "Antonio has been asking questions, putting pressure on mutual acquaintances to find you." Nicola's jaw ticked. "He filed a missing persons report. Claims you are mentally unstable, a danger to yourself." Ice flooded Ella's veins. "He's going to find me." "No." The word was absolute. "He is going to learn that some women are protected by forces he cannot threaten or bribe." "But Ella..." Nicola turned to face her fully. "This is the moment where you must decide. If you wish to truly be free of him, we cannot simply hide you. We must act." "Act how?" "Legally, first. Restraining order, filed with documentation of abuse. I have connections with judges who cannot be bought by the Lucianos. It will be public. It will be difficult. You will have to testify." Ella's hands started shaking. The thought of facing Antonio in court, of saying aloud what he'd done. But, Nicola continued, voice gentling, you will not be alone. I will ensure you have the best legal team in the state, security, whatever you need. And if the legal system fails... His expression went cold. Then we will have a different conversation. Ella knew what that meant. Knew that the man standing before her had built his empire on conversations that ended in shallow graves. I don't want you to kill him, she said. Nicola's eyebrows rose slightly. Why not? Because then he wins. He gets to be the victim, the martyr. And you... She stepped closer. You become the monster he'll claim you are. I want him in prison. I want him stripped of his badge, his connections, his power. I want him to live knowing he lost. Silence stretched between them. Then Nicola did something Ella had never seen. He smiled. Small, fleeting, but genuine. You, he said, are far stronger than you believe. I've had a good teacher in survival. No. He shook his head. Survival I taught myself. This, what you are choosing, this is something else. This is courage. And when he reached out, slowly enough that she could refuse, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, Elle didn't flinch. She leaned into the touch, just slightly, and watched something shift behind those ice-chip eyes. Something that looked almost like hope. The lawyer's name was Rebecca Chen, and she arrived at the penthouse with a briefcase full of ammunition and a smile that could cut glass. Mr. Petrov speaks highly of you, she said, shaking Ella's hand with professional firmness. Let's make sure the system works in your favor for once. They spent 4 hours at the dining table, Rebecca extracting details with surgical precision, dates, incidents, witnesses, even reluctant ones. Ella's voice grew hoarse, from talking, her tea cold and forgotten. But Rebecca never rushed her. Never suggested that any detail was too small or too humiliating to matter. Medical records? Rebecca asked, pen poised. I went to the ER twice. Told them I fell. Ella's laugh was bitter. They believed me, or pretended to. We'll subpoena them anyway. Patterns matter. Rebecca made a note. What about financial control? He had access to my accounts. Said it was easier since we lived together. Monitored every transaction. Classic coercive control. Good. That strengthens the case. Rebecca looked up, expression softening slightly. Ella, I know this is exhausting, but every word you're giving me is a nail in his coffin. By the time we're done, Antonio Calderano won't be able to sneeze without violating a court order. When Rebecca finally left, Elle slumped in her chair, utterly drained. Nicola appeared with fresh tea. He'd made himself scarce during the session, but she'd known he was nearby, listening probably, making sure she felt safe. You did well, he said, setting the cup before her. I feel like I've been turned inside out. That is what justice requires sometimes. The exposure of wounds so they can be properly treated. He settled into the chair Rebecca had vacated. The restraining order will be filed tomorrow. Antonio will be served within 48 hours. Elle wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic. What if he doesn't care about a piece of paper? Then he will. Learn that consequences exist. Nicola's tone was conversational, but Ella heard the steel beneath. I have people watching him. If he so much as drives past this building, I will know. You can't protect me forever. Why not? The question hung there, simple and enormous. Ella met his gaze, searching for the detachment she'd seen that first night, finding instead something that made her pulse skip. Because eventually, I need to rebuild my own life, she said quietly. I can't hide in your fortress forever, no matter how beautiful the cage. This is not a cage. Nicola's jaw tightened. You are free to leave whenever you wish. Am I? Ella leaned forward. Or have you just built a different kind of prison? One with Egyptian cotton sheets and a therapist on call? She regretted the words immediately. Saw them land like physical blows. Watched Nicola's expression shutter closed. He stood, movements precisely controlled. I apologize if my assistance has felt like captivity. That was never my intention. Nicola. Wait. Elle rose, but he was already walking away. I didn't mean... He paused at the archway, back still turned. My mother used to say that the cruelest cages are the ones we build for others while calling it protection, he said quietly. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps I am simply repeating patterns I swore I'd broken. Then he was gone, and Ella was left standing in the dining room, hating herself. She found him an hour later in the library, standing before a portrait she'd never noticed. A young woman with dark hair and Nicola's same ice-pale eyes, wearing a yellow sundress and laughing at whoever held the camera. Katya. Had to be. I'm sorry, Ella said from the doorway. What I said was cruel and unfair. Nicola didn't turn. It was also partially true. I have been controlling. I justified it as protection, but control by another name is still control. Ella crossed to stand beside him, studying the portrait. She was beautiful. She was kind, in a world that gave her every reason not to be. His voice roughened. When our mother died, Katya was 6. I was 8. In the chaos after, the fire, the authorities, we were separated. I screamed for her, fought the officers dragging me away. She just stood there, holding her stuffed rabbit, and said, It's okay, Nicola. We'll find each other. Ella's throat constricted. I spent years trying to find her, he continued. Used every resource, every contact. By the time I tracked her to the facility where she died, they'd already cremated her. No ceremony, no marker, just gone, as if she'd never existed. So you keep her room, Ella said softly, so someone remembers. So I remember what I failed to do. Nicola finally looked at her, and the raw pain in his eyes made Elle's chest ache. I built an empire on the promise that I would never again be too weak to protect someone who needed me. And now you tell me that protection feels like a cage, and I realize I still do not know the difference. Ella thought of Antonio, who'd called surveillance love, who'd monitored her phone and called it caring. The difference, she said carefully, is that you ask. You give me choices. You tell me I can leave, and mean it. Antonio never gave me choices. He gave me ultimatums disguised as concern. Nicola was quiet for a long moment. But you are still here because you have nowhere else to go. Is that truly choice, or just the illusion of it? I don't know, Ella admitted. But I know that for the first time in 3 years, I'm remembering what I wanted to be. The life I planned before everything derailed. And that's because you gave me space to breathe. She stepped closer, close enough to see the faint scar through his eyebrow, the silver threading his temples. You're not your father, she said. You're not Antonio. You're someone who heard a stranger begging for mourning and decided to give her a year of them. Nicola's hand lifted, hesitated, then settled. Against her cheek, warm, calloused, impossibly gentle. And what happens when the year ends? When you no longer need protection? Ella leaned into his palm. Maybe we figure that out together. For a heartbeat, she thought he might kiss her. Saw the want flicker across his face, quickly suppressed. Instead he drew back, expression carefully neutral. You should rest. Rebecca will need you sharp for the court filings. He left her standing in the library, and Ella understood. Nikola Petrov had built empires and crushed rivals. But this, simple intimacy, the vulnerability of wanting someone who might choose to leave, terrified him more than any enemy. She looked up at Katya's portrait, at that frozen moment of joy. "I think," she whispered to the laughing girl in the yellow dress, "your brother forgot how to believe in happy endings. Maybe I can remind him." The restraining order was granted 3 days later. Antonio's response came via a letter slipped under the apartment building's service entrance. Crude, misspelled, full of threats that made Rebecca swear creatively in Mandarin. "We're filing criminal charges," she announced, pacing Nikola's office. "Stalking, harassment, violation of the order. I want him in handcuffs by Friday." "Will it stick?" Nikola asked, voice dangerously calm. "With the evidence Elle provided, the medical records, the documented pattern?" "Yes, but—" Rebecca's expression darkened. "He has friends. Not enough to stop this, but enough to make it messy." Ella, sitting quietly in the corner, spoke up. "Let it be messy. I'm done hiding." Both of them turned to look at her. "You're sure?" Rebecca asked. "Because once we file, this becomes public. Your name, your testimony. The media will—" "I don't care." Elle stood, something fierce and bright kindling in her chest. "I spent 3 years making myself invisible because he said visibility was dangerous. I'm done shrinking. Let everyone see exactly what he is." Nikola's expression shifted. Pride, maybe. Or recognition. "Then we go to war," he said quietly. And watching him, Ella realized she wasn't falling for the man who'd offered her shelter. She was falling for the one who kept giving her choices, even when those choices terrified him. The one who understood that love meant holding someone gently enough that they could still fly. Winter gave way to early spring, with the restraining order holding firm and Antonio maintaining a careful distance. Too careful, Rebecca noted. Men like him didn't simply accept defeat. Elle tried not to think about it, tried to focus on the forward momentum of her life finally resuming, portfolio redesign, freelance inquiries, a small contract designing logos for a startup that didn't ask about the year-long gap in her resume. Dr. Volkov called it reclaiming narrative. Ella called it remembering I exist. Nikola called it inevitable, with a quiet satisfaction that made her heart twist. He'd become less guarded over the months. Not warm. Nikola would never be warm, but present in ways that felt like intimacy. Cooking breakfast together in comfortable silence, reading in the library, feet tucked under her, while he worked through paperwork in Russian. Small touches that lingered. His hand on her lower back guiding her through doorways, fingers brushing when passing coffee. Nothing overt. Nothing Elle could name. But something was shifting, tectonic and irreversible. It came to a head on a Tuesday in March. Ella had been working in the dining room, laptop open, sketches scattered, when Nikola arrived home at 2 p.m., unheard of. He looked different. Jacket missing, shirt untucked, knuckles bloodied and badly wrapped. What happened? Ella was on her feet immediately. Nothing that concerns you. But his voice was tight, and he was favoring his left side. Nikola, I said it does not concern you. Harsh, dismissive, the tone she'd heard him use with subordinates, never with her. Ella flinched and something in his expression cracked. Wait! He reached for her, but she'd already stepped back. Ella, I did not mean... Don't. Her voice shook. Don't use that voice with me. I've had enough of men who think volume equals authority. Nikola went very still. I am not Antonio. Then stop acting like I'm too fragile to handle the truth. Ella crossed her arms. What happened? A long pause. Then, with visible effort, there was a territorial dispute. The Lucianos have been pushing boundaries. It became physical. The Lucianos, Antonio's employers. Yes. The pieces clicked together, cold and certain. This is about me. They're coming after you because you're protecting me. Nicola's silence was confirmation enough. Elle sank into a chair, nausea rising. I'm a liability. I'm putting you in danger. Stop. Nicola knelt before her, ignoring the way it made him wince. You are not a liability. You are... He seemed to struggle with the words. You are the first thing in 20 years that has felt like a reason rather than an obligation. Ella's breath caught. I have spent decades building power, he continued, voice low and raw, accumulating it like armor, telling myself that control equals safety. And then you asked to hide in my car, and I realized all that power means nothing if I do not use it to protect something that matters. I matter? The question came out smaller than she'd intended. Nicola's hand came up, cradling her face with a gentleness that contradicted every rumor she'd heard about him. You matter. You have mattered since that first night. And if the Lucianos think they can use you to manipulate me, they have fundamentally misunderstood the situation. Which is? His thumb traced her cheekbone. That I would burn this entire city down before I let anyone hurt you again. Ella should have been frightened. Should have recognized the obsessive edge in those words. Instead, she leaned forward and kissed him. Nicola froze, clearly shocked, then made a sound low in his throat and kissed her back. Careful, controlled, like he was afraid she might shatter. His hand slid into her hair, angling her head, deepening the kiss until Elle's thoughts scattered into static and sensation. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nicola rested his forehead against hers. This is dangerous, he said. I know. If we do this, if we are together, it makes you a target. Every enemy I have will see you as a weakness to exploit. Elle pulled back enough to meet his eyes. And if we don't? If I walk away to keep you safe, or you push me away to protect me, we still lose. At least this way we lose together. Nicola's laugh was startled, almost helpless. You are far braver than I am. No, I just spent 3 years learning that safety without living is just a slower kind of death. Ella kissed him again, soft and sure. I want to live. With you, if you'll have me. For a long moment, Nicola just looked at her, like he was memorizing her face, cataloging this moment in case it was the last. Then he stood, pulling her up with him. Come with me. He led her through the apartment to the locked room, the one that had stayed closed for the entire 5 months she'd been there. Nicola pulled a key from his pocket, hesitated, then unlocked the door. Inside was a child's bedroom frozen in time. Pale yellow walls, a twin bed with a patchwork quilt, shelves lined with books and a worn stuffed rabbit sitting on the pillow. Everything carefully preserved, waiting. After Katya died, Nicola said quietly, I recreated her room exactly as I remembered it, down to the rabbit she was holding when they took her from me. I told myself it was a memorial, but Dr. Volkov, years ago when I first hired her, she said it was a cage, that I was trapping my sister's memory the same way my guilt trapped me. He moved to the window, looking out at the city. I kept this room locked because opening it felt like admitting she is truly gone, that I failed, that no amount of power or money could rewrite that ending. Ella stepped closer, understanding. But you asked me once why I keep it. He turned. And the answer is, because I did not know how to let go. Did not know that holding someone's memory does not require freezing time. He crossed to the bookshelf, pulled down a photo album Ella had never seen. flipped it open to a picture of a little girl in a yellow sundress, laughing. "I want to remember Katya alive," he said. "Not just as a tragedy, not just as proof of my failure, but as a person who laughed and read fairy tales and believed we would find each other." He held the album out to Ella. "Will you help me do that?" Ella took it, understanding what he was really asking, not just to remember his sister, but to build something new, to transform grief into something that allowed for joy. "Yes," she said simply. And when Nicola kissed her this time, it tasted like permission to live, to love, to believe that broken things could still be whole. The attack came 2 weeks later. Elle was leaving her first in-person client meeting, a small design firm in Brooklyn, nothing fancy, but hers, when a black SUV pulled up alongside her. Antonio leaned out, face bloated with rage and something else. Desperation. "Get in the car, Elle." Her body remembered before her mind could catch up. The cold rush of adrenaline, the instinct to obey, to make herself smaller. But Dr. Volkov's voice cut through. The panic. Past danger, present safety. "This is not then." "No," Elle said, loud and clear. Antonio's expression twisted. "You think you're safe because you're fucking some Russian gangster? He can't protect you forever. Restraining order doesn't mean shit if no one's around to enforce it." Elle's hand was already on her phone, already dialing the number Nicola had programmed under emergency. He answered before the first ring finished. "Elle. Antonio's here. Corner of Atlantic and Court. Do not engage. Do not run. Stay on the line. Help is 30 seconds away." Antonio must have heard, because he lurched out of the SUV. "Calling your boyfriend? Let's see how tough he is when—" 2 cars appeared from nowhere, boxing in the SUV. Men emerged, Nicola's people. She recognized them from the building, and Antonio stumbled back, suddenly aware he'd miscalculated. Then Nicola's Rolls-Royce pulled up, and he stepped out, perfectly composed in a black suit, looking like death in tailored wool. "Elle," he said calmly, not taking his eyes off Antonio. "Go to the car." She obeyed, legs shaking, but paused at the door. "Don't kill him." Nicola's jaw tightened. "I will not make promises I cannot keep." "Then promise me this. When you're done, you come home. To me." Something in his expression softened. "That I can promise." Ella got in the car. Through the tinted window, she watched Nicola approach Antonio, who was shouting, threatening, waving his phone with its supposed NYPD connections. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she saw the moment Antonio realized. Those connections meant nothing here. This was Nicola's city, and he'd crossed a line that money and badges couldn't uncross. The confrontation lasted less than 5 minutes. Then Antonio was being shoved into one of the waiting cars, and Nicola was sliding into the rolls beside her. "He is alive," Nicola said without preamble. "Unharmed, though he may wish otherwise once Rebecca is done filing charges for violating the restraining order, assault, stalking, and several other infractions I will encourage her to discover." Elle exhaled shakily. "Thank you. For not becoming the monster you believe I could be?" Nicola's smile was grim. "I am still that monster, Ella. I simply choose for you to be a different version of it." He pulled her close, and Ella went willingly, pressing her face to his chest, breathing in cedar and winter and safety. "I was so scared," she whispered. "I know, and I am sorry you had to feel that fear again. But Elle—" He tilted her chin up. "You called me. You did not freeze. Did not obey him. You chose to fight. That is everything." And Elle realized he was right. She'd faced Antonio, the man who'd haunted her nightmares for years, and she'd won. Not because Nicola saved her, because she'd saved herself first. The criminal charges against Antonio Calderano proceeded with the grinding inevitability of bureaucracy. Rebecca filed motion after motion, building a case so airtight even Antonio's police connections couldn't dismiss it. Ella testified in April, in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and fear. Antonio sat across the room in a cheap suit, flanked by a public defender who looked exhausted before the proceedings even began. He stared at Elle the entire time, not with rage, but with something worse, injured disbelief, like she'd betrayed him by refusing to disappear quietly. Rebecca walked her through the timeline with clinical precision. The first blow. The escalation. The systematic isolation. Medical records projected on screens, showing breaks and bruises Elle had explained away as clumsiness. And on November 14th, Rebecca asked, "What happened?" Ella's voice didn't shake. "He told me he was going to make sure I never embarrassed him again. Then he threw me against the kitchen counter. I felt my ribs crack. When I tried to leave, he blocked the door. So I waited until he passed out drunk and I ran." "Where did you go?" "I hid in a car, a stranger's car. I needed anywhere that wasn't there." She didn't mention Nicola by name. Didn't need to. The defense tried to paint her as vindictive, as having found a wealthy protector and fabricated abuse for financial gain. But then, the prosecutor submitted phone records. Antonio's 47 calls and 89 texts in the 3 days after she'd left, each more threatening than the last. Surveillance footage of him violating the restraining order. Testimony from the ER. Doctor who'd noted Ella's injuries were consistent with intimate partner violence, but hadn't pursued it further. The judge, a woman in her 60s who'd seen too many cases like this, was unimpressed with Antonio's denials. "Mr. Calderano," she said, "you will remain in custody pending trial. Bail is denied." Antonio erupted, shouting, until bailiffs dragged him from the courtroom. Ella sat frozen, Rebecca's hand on her shoulder, and felt something inside her finally break open. Not collapse. Bloom. Outside the courthouse, Nicola waited by the rolls, flanked by 2 of his men. He searched Ella's face as she approached, looking for damage. "It's done," Ella said. "He's being held. Trial's set for June." Nicola nodded once, then opened his arms. Ella walked into them, letting herself be held in full view of the courthouse steps, the gathering reporters, anyone watching. Letting the world see that she was not alone, not ashamed, not hiding anymore. "I am proud of you," Nicola murmured against her hair. "So incredibly proud." Elle pulled back, smiling through tears. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes," he said firmly. "You could have. I simply made it easier." In the car, Elle let exhaustion claim her, head resting on Nicola's shoulder. She woke as they pulled up to the penthouse, disoriented. "I thought we could go somewhere else tonight," Nicola said quietly. "If you wish." Ella blinked. "Where?" "Somewhere I have not taken anyone in a very long time. A place I built for. I am not certain. Penance, perhaps. Or hope." The house was 2 hours north of the city, hidden behind gates and forest. Not a mansion, a home. Warm wood and stone, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a lake, a fireplace large enough to stand in. Elle walked through it slowly, touching surfaces. A kitchen that looked actually used. Bookshelves organized by interest rather than aesthetics. A bedroom with quilts that matched the one in Katya's frozen room. "I bought this 5 years ago," Nicola said from the doorway. "After Dr. Volkov told me I needed to create space for a future, not just a memorial for the past. But I could never..." He gestured helplessly. It felt like admitting I deserved happiness, like believing I could have something beyond survival. Ella crossed to him, took his hands. "And now?" Now I think perhaps I was waiting for a reason to believe it. His thumbs traced circles on her wrists. For you. They made dinner together. Nothing. Fancy, just pasta and salad. And ate on the floor in front of the fireplace because the dining table felt too formal. Nicola told stories about Katya. How she'd insisted on reading the endings of books first. How she'd convinced him that puddles were portals to other worlds. She would have liked you, he said softly. Would have said I was brooding too much and needed someone to remind me how to laugh. Was she right? Always. His smile was gentle, edged with grief. She used to tell me, before everything, that being strong meant protecting people, not punishing them. I spent 30 years forgetting that distinction. Ella leaned her head on his shoulder. You remembered when it mattered. They stayed like that until the fire burned low. Then Nicola led her upstairs to the bedroom. Nothing happened beyond sleep. Nicola held her like she was precious, like he was afraid she might vanish if he let go. But it was the most intimate Ella had ever felt. Safe enough to be, vulnerable, trusted enough to trust back. In the morning, she woke to sunlight and the smell of coffee. Nicola stood at the window, silhouetted against the lake, and turned when he heard her move. I have been thinking, he said carefully, about what happens after the trial. After Antonio is sentenced and you are truly, legally free. Ella's heart clenched. Are you asking me to leave? God, no. He crossed to the bed, sat on the edge. I am asking you to stay, not in the penthouse, not as someone I am protecting, but here, with me, as... He struggled with the word. As my partner, in all ways. Ella's breath caught. Nicola, I know the life I lead is dangerous. I know what I am asking is selfish. But Ella, you have taught me that power without purpose is just noise. And you have become my purpose. He took her hand, pressed it to his chest. I want to build a life with you. One where you have your design career, and I have my enterprises. Where we choose each other. Every day, not because we must, but because we wish to. Ella looked at their joined hands, at this man who'd learned to be gentle for her sake. I have one condition, she said. Nicola tensed. Name it. Katya's room. We open it. We take the books and the rabbit and the things that mattered, and we keep them somewhere that feels like love, not penance. And then we turn that room into something new. Maybe an office for my design work, maybe a guest room, maybe just empty space waiting to be filled. She met his eyes. Because you can honor her memory without being imprisoned by it. For a long moment, Nicola just stared at her. Then he kissed her, deep and grateful, and laced with something that felt like freedom. Yes, he said against her lips. Yes to all of it. And Ella, who'd spent years believing she didn't deserve softness, let herself fall completely into the arms of a man who'd forgotten how to be soft until she reminded him. They opened Katya's room together a week later. Dr. Volkov came at Nicola's request. For moral support, he'd said. But Ella knew it was more. Volkov had been the one to first suggest this years ago. She'd earned the right to witness. Nicola stood at the threshold for a long time, hand on the doorknob, before finally pushing it open. The three of them moved through the space slowly. Nicola picked up the stuffed rabbit, holding it like it might break. She called him Zayats, he said quietly. Little hair. She took him everywhere. Then he should be somewhere you can see him, Elle said gently. Not locked away. They packed carefully. Books into boxes for Nicola's library. The quilt folded for the lake house. Photos sorted into albums. The yellow sundress, the one from the portrait, Nicola hesitated over for a long time, before finally placing it in a memory box with other treasures. Dr. Volkov watched it all with quiet approval. This is good, Nicola. This is letting her rest. When the room was empty, except for furniture, Nicola stood in the center, eyes closed. I am sorry, he whispered. To Katya, to himself, to the child he'd been. I am sorry I could not save you, but I will not waste the life I lived when yours was stolen. I promise you that. Ella took his hand. Volkov touched his shoulder. And together, they walked out, leaving the door open behind them. The trial concluded in early June with a guilty verdict on all counts: assault, stalking, coercive control, violation of restraining order. Antonio Hun. Calderano was sentenced to 8 years, with the judge noting his systematic abuse of power and complete lack of remorse. Ella watched from the gallery as they led him away in handcuffs. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. Just a man, not a monster. Rebecca squeezed her hand. It's over. But it wasn't. Not quite. The real ending came 3 weeks later, at the lake house. Ella had moved in officially, transforming Katya's old room in the penthouse into a bright studio space where she worked on increasingly ambitious design projects. Her client list was growing. Small businesses, nonprofits, a couple of larger firms who'd heard through the grapevine that designer Petrov's dating was worth the risk. She'd bristled at the nepotism implication until Nicola had pointed out, reasonably, that using his connections was no different than any other networking. Your talent stands alone, he'd said. My name simply opens doors. What you do once inside is entirely yours. Now standing on the lake house deck in July twilight, Elle watched Nicola at the water's edge. He was teaching, of all things, a little girl to skip stones. Maya was 6, daughter of one of Nicola's enforcers who died in a territorial dispute 2 months prior. Her mother had overdosed years ago. No other family. The system would have swallowed her whole. So Nicola had stepped in, filed for guardianship, hired a nanny, enrolled her in a good school, and spent his weekends learning how to braid hair from YouTube videos. Ella had watched the transformation with awe. Nicola, who commanded empires, brought to his knees by a small girl who demanded bedtime stories and asked endless questions about why the sky changed colors. Uncle Nick, Maya called now. You're doing it wrong. You have to make it flat, like this. She demonstrated with exaggerated seriousness, the stone bouncing twice before sinking. Nicola tried again, managed 3 skips, and Maya cheered like he'd won Olympic gold. Ella's chest tightened with something too big for words. Dr. Volkov had called it reparative attachment, Nicola's psyche trying to rewrite the ending he couldn't change. Ella called it watching someone learn to be human again. You are going to spoil her, Ella said, joining them at the water's edge. Absolutely. Nicola didn't look remotely apologetic. She has already experienced more loss than most adults. The least I can do is ensure her childhood from this point forward is filled with excess, affection and flat stones. Maya tugged Ella's hand. Did you bring the paints? You promised to teach me about colors mixing. After dinner, Ella promised. And only if you actually eat vegetables this time, not just hide them under your napkin. Maya's guilty expression was answer enough. Dinner was chaotic in the best way. Maya talking nonstop about her day, Nicola interjecting with dry observations that made Elle laugh, the 3 of them moving around each other with the easy choreography of family. After Maya was bathed and storied and tucked into bed, clutching Zayats, which she'd claimed as her own with Nicola's tearful permission, Ella and Nicola sat on the deck with wine, watching stars emerge. I never imagined this, Nicola said quietly. A year ago I would have said this life was impossible for someone like me. Someone like you? Someone built from violence. Someone whose hands are... He stopped, jaw tight. Ella took one of those hands, scarred and strong, and pressed, a kiss to the palm. These hands have held me when I was breaking, braided a little girl's hair, skipped stones. Yes, they've done terrible things, but they've also done beautiful ones. Nicola's eyes gleamed in the starlight. You have ruined me for my old life, you know. I cannot return to being the man I was, the one who cared only for power and control. Good. Ella shifted closer. Because that man never would have opened his car door for a stranger. Never would have chosen mercy over revenge. Never would have learned to French braid. His laugh was low, genuine. The French braid remains terrible. Maya doesn't care. She just loves that you try. They sat in comfortable silence, the lake lapping at the shore, the house warm and glowing behind them. I want to marry you, Nicola said suddenly. Ella's heart stuttered. What? Not immediately. Not until you feel ready, if you ever do. But I want you to know. He turned to face her fully. That this is not temporary for me. This is not protection or obligation. This is me choosing you, every day, for however many days we have. Ella's eyes burned. I choose you too. Even though you can't French braid. Even though your world is dangerous and complicated. Even though loving you means living with the knowledge that powerful men will always have enemies. You are not afraid? Terrified, she admitted. But more afraid of living small, of going back to the version of myself who thought survival was enough. She cupped his face. You taught me to want more, to believe I deserve more. Nicola kissed her, soft and deep, and Ella tasted salt. His tears or hers, she wasn't sure. When they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. We should get married here, at the lake. Somewhere Katya would have loved. Ella's throat tightened. She would have loved you being happy. She would have loved you making me happy, he corrected. There is a difference. They stayed outside until the stars were thick, as spilled sugar, talking about the future. Maya's education, Ella's growing business, Nicola's plans to shift his enterprises toward legitimate holdings. Not erasing the past, but building something new on its foundation. When they finally went inside, Ella paused at Maya's door. The little girl was sprawled across the bed, Zayats tucked under one arm, her hair a dark tangle on the pillow. She looks like Katya, Nicola whispered beside her. Same wildness, same certainty that the world is good if you look hard enough. You're giving her that certainty, the chance Katya never got. We are giving her that. Nicola's arm came around Ella's waist. All of this, the healing, the hope, it only works because you believed in me when I had forgotten how to believe in myself. Ella leaned into him, watching the child sleep. We saved each other. That's how it works. 6 months later, the gallery opening was Elle's idea. A charity event showcasing local artists, all proceeds going to domestic violence survivors. She'd designed the promotional materials, recruited artists, and somehow convinced Nicola to host it at his downtown building. Now, standing in a space transformed by art and light, Ella watched Nicola move through the crowd with Maya perched on his shoulders, her fancy dress bunched up and her laughter ringing off the high ceilings. Rebecca found Ella by the sculptures. You did good, boss. This is going to raise serious money. We did good, Elle corrected. You handled all the legal wrangling with the nonprofits. True, but this... Rebecca gestured at the event. This was your vision, your courage. A year ago, you were hiding in a car. Now you're changing lives. Ella's throat tightened. A year ago, someone changed mine. She looked across the room to where Nicola had set Maya down to examine a painting at her eye level. He crouched beside her, listening with exaggerated seriousness as she explained why the colors were wrong but also right. Doctor, Volkov appeared at Ella's elbow. He is different with her, with you, more human, less fortress. He was always human, Ella said, just convinced he couldn't afford to be. And now? Now he's learning that humanity isn't weakness. It's the only thing that matters. Volkov smiled. You have taught him well. But tell me, what have you learned? Ella considered. That asking for help isn't surrender. That love doesn't require perfection, just presence. That the people we become after trauma can be stronger than who we were before, not despite the breaking, but because of it. Good. Volkov squeezed her shoulder. Very good. As the evening wound down, Ella found herself on the balcony, looking out at the city. Manhattan glittered like a promise, like proof that darkness could be punctuated by light. Nicola joined her, Maya drowsy in his arms. She is asking if we can get a puppy, he said, amused. Apparently every proper family requires a dog. What did you say? That I would consider it, after extensive research into appropriate breeds for city living. His smile was soft. I am not prepared for the level of chaos a puppy would introduce. Elle laughed. You run a criminal empire. I think you can handle a golden retriever. Former criminal empire, he corrected. Increasingly legitimate enterprises with only occasional moral ambiguity. Right. Much better. Maya stirred, blinking sleepily. Elle? Are you going to be my mom for real? Elle's heart stopped. She looked at Nicola, who was suddenly very focused on the skyline. We've talked about this, Malaya, he said gently. Ella and I are getting married soon. That makes her family. But family can leave, Maya said, with the blunt honesty of children who'd lost people. Moms stay forever. Ella knelt down, waiting until Maya looked at her. I can't promise forever, because life doesn't work that way. But I can promise I will choose to stay, every single day, for as long as I'm breathing. Is that enough? Maya studied her seriously, then nodded. Okay, can I call you Mama? Ella's vision blurred. I would love that. Maya hugged her, small and fierce, and Ella held on tight, understanding that this imperfect, complicated, beautiful thing was what healing looked like. Nicola's hand found the small of her back, steady and warm. The three of them stood there, suspended between the glittering city and the endless sky. And Ella thought, this is the ending I never dared to imagine. Not perfect, not without scars, but whole. We spend so much time believing that broken things can't be fixed, that trauma writes an ending we can't rewrite, that people forged in darkness can't learn to live in light. But Elle and Nicola proved something different, that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about building a present where the past no longer controls you. She learned to trust again, not blindly, but courageously, with eyes wide open to the risk. He learned that strength isn't about dominance. It's about kneeling down to a child's level and listening. And together, they created a family from the wreckage of their separate traumas. Maybe that's the real story all of us are living. Not how we survive the breaking, but what we choose to build in the aftermath. Maybe redemption isn't about deserving it. It's about accepting it when it arrives in the form of a stranger's car on a freezing November night. Maybe love isn't about perfection. It's about finding someone who sees your scars and says, "Me too. Now let's build something beautiful anyway."